Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I am just honored to introduce Dr. Ronald D. Siegel to you all. Dr. Ronald D. Siegel is an assistant professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, where he has taught for over 35 years. He is a longtime student of mindfulness meditation and serves on the board of directors and faculty of the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He teaches internationally about the application of mindfulness practice in psychotherapy and other fields. And he maintains a private clinical practice in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Dr. Siegel is author of a comprehensive guide for general audiences, The Mindfulness Solution, Everyday Practices for Everyday Problems, and co-editor of the critically acclaimed text, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, 2nd edition, and of Wisdom and Compassion in Psychotherapy, co-author of the professional guide, Sitting Together, Essential Skills for Mindfulness-Based Psychotherapy, co-author of the self-treatment guide, Back Sense, which integrates Western and Eastern approaches for treating chronic back pain, and author of the new book, which we will discuss a lot about today, which is The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are. He's also professor for the Science of Mindfulness, a research-based path to well-being produced by the Great Courses, and a regular contributor to other professional publications and co-director of the annual Harvard Medical School Conference on Meditation and Psychotherapy. So welcome, Dr. Siegel. It's such an honor to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I can't wait to have you share a little bit about the new book, The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are. So my first question is, what inspired you to write a book about being ordinary in a world where everyone wants to be special?
It was interesting when hunting around for an optimal title for this book. I had several people say, nobody's going to want to read a book about being ordinary because everybody, of course, wants to be special. You know, it actually came out of a combination of personal and clinical experience. The idea came to me when I was in my early 60s, and I had spent a good 40 years involved in meditation practices, largely in a Buddhist context. So the goal of which was, in many ways, to let go of self-preoccupation, right? To transcend ego is one of the aims of such practices. And I had spent an equivalent amount of time either doing or being in psychotherapy, where you would think that the result would be to establish something like a coherent, secure sense of self. And to be honest, in watching my mind, I realized neither had occurred, that my feelings about myself were going up and down quite regularly. And there was almost always a monitor in the back of my mind. How am I doing? Right now, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, Dr. Lottie. I'm talking to the audience. And there's a monitor. How's this sounding? Is this a good way to begin? Et cetera, et cetera. And I started noticing the fluctuations, right? That good things would happen, or I'd get positive feedback and I'd feel good about myself. And then not so good things would happen. The opposite would happen. You know, I'd have a good psychotherapy session where I felt like I was really connecting with my patient and I was really being helpful. And I think all these years of training and practice, they've really paid off. You know, I'm really able to be useful now to this person. And then I'd have another session that was disconnected, or we were stuck in some loop. And I think, you know, I knew I should have gone into some other field. You know, this is clearly not my calling. So, you know, noticing these ups and downs. And then I looked at my clinical practice and I realized everybody that I was working with had this to some degree, not necessarily, you know, Frank, what we call bipolar disorder, where somebody either thinks they're, you know, Napoleon or a horrible sinner, but these fluctuations, sometimes hourly, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly. So it got me curious. Is there any way to free ourselves from this? Because it wasn't fun. It meant always being stressed out, either trying to stay on top of my game or them staying on top of their game, or basically being bummed out, feeling not good enough, feeling inadequate in some way, feeling like, you know, I'm not living up to who I want to be. So the inspiration was, you know, might there be hope? Is there some way out of this?
I love that, the book really came out from your own experiences too. And that riding that roller coaster ride of I'm doing great and maybe I should have done something else. It's just, I think most people have these roller coaster rides happening, in their life. So how do we get out of that roller coaster ride? What can we do to be on top of that roller coaster ride instead of having to go up and down?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the answer is that we get on top of the roller coaster ride so much as perhaps we step off of it. Perhaps we come to see how the whole construct, the whole process of thinking that we can be either better or worse than others, valuable or not valuable, lovable or not, that the whole that whole way of looking at things is something of an illusion. And we're not going to get rid of it entirely, but we can get some space from it. And maybe one of the ways to get out of it is actually to begin to look at how we got into it, to begin to look at what are the factors and forces that keep it going. And a huge one is simply the way the brain evolved. Psychologists these days are pretty united about one thing, that the brain evolved as an organ of survival, not as an organ of happiness, and that we actually didn't evolve to be happy. Most of our instincts were designed to perpetuate our DNA. There's been all this writing about the selfish gene, which it's not that genes actually are selfish, but it's that if you kind of reverse engineer natural selection and you say, so how did natural selection result in this given organism being organized the way it is here and now? We say, well, it's whatever the adaptations were, whatever the mutations and the changes were that were going to favor surviving long enough to reproduce and passing our genes on to the next generation. That's what we're going to wind up with. And our brain is very much like that. So to illustrate, if you were to go to the African savannah, and I've had the privilege of doing this, and going on a so-called safari, which is riding in a Jeep with a naturalist who points things out, this same pattern starts showing up in species after species. There'll be a dominant male surrounded literally by a harem of reproductively promising females. And then over in the next field, there'll be a bunch of usually younger guys doing the species-specific equivalent of playing basketball or soccer, trying to hone their skills to become dominant. You think, well, what's up with that? Why all this energy to become dominant? And then you see in other species, there's species of crickets, if you put them together in a box, inside of really just a few minutes, they organize themselves into a dominance hierarchy, what we call pecking orders among birds. For example, birds have pecking orders. Kids, if you put them in a room together at age 4, inside of a few minutes, they'll organize themselves into what we call transitive dominance hierarchies. That means if Juanita realizes that she's more powerful than George, and George realized that he can pull it over on Susie, Susie knows immediately, watch out for Juanita and be subservient to her. Like kids will organize themselves. So why? Well, as it turns out, historically, across all these different species, the dominant males and the females that consort with them had a better chance at reproduction and passing on their genes. It wasn't 100%, but that was a really, really big factor. So we could imagine that there would be members of these species, or even ancient humans, ancient hominids, hanging around, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and really just being with cooperation. But they weren't our ancestors because they didn't have the reproductive advantage of the ones who were concerned with this. Now, we also do, thank God, have instincts for cooperation. And we'll see how those are part of how we get out of this. But the first thing is just recognizing that we've got this tendency to compare ourselves to others, figure out where we are in the hierarchy. And this is what becomes the fundamental thing driving what we call self-esteem. Because if I feel good about myself by thinking that I'm a nice guy, or I'm caring or loving, or I'm intelligent, or I'm athletically competent, whatever I'm using as my yardstick. We all use different yardsticks. The thing we have in common is these comparisons. But if I think that I'm good in one of these ways and I feel good about myself, I'm implicitly making a comparison to others that I think aren't so good, right? Well, that person isn't so caring, isn't so giving, isn't so generous, isn't so intelligent, isn't so whatever, fill in the blank. So it's actually this scoping out the scene, what are the other primates up to, and comparing ourselves to them that drives this, and then shows up as these fluctuating feelings of feeling good about ourselves or not. So the first step is actually just seeing, oh gosh, this is pretty strongly hardwired in me, isn't it? And it's not going to go away. Now, the good news here is that things that are hardwired, that we have a propensity for, we don't have to be slaves to them. Like, we have a pretty strong propensity to like fat and sugar, because back in the day, that was associated with calories, nutrients, right? But nowadays, if we were going to eat a diet primarily of donuts, we wouldn't live very long. And in fact, when we try it, we learn pretty quickly, that doesn't feel very good. So we don't have to be slaves to this stuff, but we need to recognize it first and foremost. So that's the first step, is recognizing where this came from.
So when we drive that ego, and we want it, so the Susan and the little kids and everybody, the crickets, they create that hierarchy. So is that then driven by our ego?
Yeah, I think when spiritual traditions talk about ego and talk about all the things that they do to transcend ego, whether that's through prayer and devotion to God, or to a guru, or a meditative practices, or the like, I think what we're talking about is trying to let go of, and I'd be humble about this, soften a bit our preoccupation with this stuff, because it's not going to go away. It even shows up, in spiritual traditions among meditators. You see this all the time, like, who's more enlightened, right? Who's less concerned with ego? Who's less, who's less narcissistic? It just becomes competing about some new thing. So the tendency shows up across the board. And noticing that, so this is our instinctual concern with comparison, that what we call ego in spiritual paths is really this biological predisposition showing up in our thoughts and feelings. And then we call that ego. Exactly.
So everybody's striving to, be better than somebody else, because in the background, we got that ego that we need to feel good about ourselves. But then when we have successes, why is it that we don't feel good for very long?
Yeah, it doesn't work. I mean, I've discovered this the hard way, because I've had a pretty nice career. I'm a psychologist. I get to teach. I've gotten to write, and I've gotten to travel all over the place and be at conferences and stuff, and talk to wonderful colleagues, like this opportunity to talk with you. And yet nothing lasts. And so what's up with that? And there seem to be two reasons for this. And this is also part of breaking free a bit, is really seeing these reasons. The first is something that we might call, it sounds like a fancy term, but it's very simple, narcissistic recalibration, which basically means the thing that used to float our boat stops floating our boat as we shift in our position in different ways. So we can all, I don't know if you grew up in Europe, is that right? So I don't know if you had this toy in Europe, but a very common American toy is a series of rings. They look kind of like donuts with a small hole in the middle. They're usually in different colors. They're either made out of wood or plastic. And the object, if for a toddler, is to stick them in size order on a pole. And when you get it right, it looks like a cone or a Christmas tree. And it's like, yeah, look, mommy, look, daddy, I did it, right? And even if mommy and daddy aren't there, hey, man, it looks great. I got it. Now, that once floated our boat. And, I can imagine maybe, in the skilled nursing facility, it will again someday. But at the moment, it's not working anymore, right? I've moved past that. And the same for all the other things, learning to ride a bicycle, learning to read and write, graduating elementary school, middle school, high school, college, graduate degrees, all these things, getting a first girlfriend or boyfriend, maybe owning your first car, renting your first apartment. Every one of these things, at least as I remember back in my life, when I got these, I felt really good about myself for a little while, until I habituated to it. and started looking around for what's next and what's the next level. I often do workshops for mental health professionals, and I like to talk to them about this and about how hard most of us worked to get our degree, whether it was a master's degree or a doctorate or a medical degree, as you've earned, and how good it felt, right, to get that degree. And then I'll ask the group, so how many of you woke up this morning feeling really good about yourself because you had your advanced degree? And everybody starts laughing, right? The same way you're smiling at this moment, except sometimes there's like one newly minted clinician who raised their hand and they say, why is everybody laughing, right? Because they haven't yet habituated to this, but we do. So that's the first problem. The first problem is we habituate to everything and we change our scale. It's like a rubber ruler. We need more and more just to feel okay about ourselves. And the other big problem, I think of this as the Newtonian problem, is what goes up goes down, right? So let's say we're really at the top of a game. Let's say literally an Olympic gold medalist, and we won the gold. What are the chances we're going to win the gold in the same event in 4 years? Maybe. In 8 years? Probably not. In 12? Definitely not. Right. So, other people, we develop skills and we lose skills, and others are, we may be successful at something, and then somebody else is more successful at it. So between the recalibration and the fact that everything changes, so what goes up is going to go down, we really can't win at this game. The problem, what really kind of messes us up, is we become so addicted to the little victories, right? They feel so good when we get recognized, somebody thinks we're wonderful in some way, we think that we did a good job at something, or we simply feel good about ourselves privately because, I was a good person there. I felt good how I was as a friend. We have these little successes and we feel good about them. But then when they wear off, we start to feel not so good, and we start to crave another success. It's really just like what happens with other addictions, that, cocaine feels pretty good until it wears off, and then it feels pretty bad. And we think, how can I get that good feeling back and get rid of the bad feeling? Well, maybe more cocaine will do it. But we do this around all sorts of things where we're driven to achieve in whatever realm it is, it could be popularity, it could be wealth, it could be fame, it could be just, other people thinking we're a good person.
No, I was just thinking that it sounds very similar to any kind of addiction, shopping or drugs, alcohol, etc. Is that addiction of knowing you did a good job, or getting that confirmation or approval or whatever it is that people are looking for. So people who are driven by this, I got this degree, but it's not enough. Now I got to get another degree, or I got to buy a bigger house, or whatever it is that drives that. How do they get out of that loop?
Yeah. I mean, it can be very subtle, by the way. I don't want to say that this is just about these people who are obviously shallow and narcissistic. Maybe because I don't want to think of myself as being shallow and narcissistic, but it seems pretty universal. So it can be among people who are just, sweet, good, ordinary folks, but who, when the other person seems sweeter, or the other person, made a better casserole for the PTA meeting, or the other person, seemed to be more in the in crowd, and people seem to like them better. This can be in all sorts of levels, even without the crass materialism, or that person seems to have a better relationship with their kid. I'm jealous. It can take a million different forms. So the ways out. Okay. So the first one is recognizing where this came from and knowing that, starting to know it. Another part of freeing ourselves is developing some kind of self-awareness practice. I happen to be a student, as you can tell from my bio that you graciously read, of mindfulness practices, right? And mindfulness practices are basically simply training the heart and the mind to pay attention with acceptance of whatever's happening inside. And one of the results of that, I once gave a talk on mindfulness practices at Google, and the engineers, being engineers, came up with what I thought was a great metaphor. They said, oh, mindfulness develops higher resolution consciousness, like more pixels per square centimeter of awareness. The difference between a high definition TV and the old kind. And it's like that. You start to notice things in more detail when you take up mindfulness practice. And one of the things that you can start to be mindful of are these fluctuations. Just start to notice every time that we start to feel kind of good about ourselves and proud and like that. And every time we start to feel, like the dog with the tail between its legs, like, not so good, not so successful, ashamed, less than, smaller than, less good than, whatever it particularly is. And just start to monitor this, because the more we monitor it, the more we start to see something very crazy is going on here. We start to see that these fluctuations are happening a lot. I mean, I can open my email in the morning and, why am I afraid of my email fundamentally, right? I'm afraid that something's going to show up that's going to make me feel like I'm failing or disappointing somebody in some way. Part of my particular neurotic patterns is to kind of overextend myself and get involved in a lot of projects. So as a perfect example, before we spoke today, I realized just a couple of hours before, oh my God, I forgot to send you the materials that you had asked for. And then I'm scrambling to do it, but it's like the realization of I forgot to do it. Oh gosh, what an irresponsible interviewee, because I know I've been an interviewer. You want to give the person time to look things over and all that. Just as one of countless examples of the kind of thing that can happen during the day. And the more we can watch it, the better it becomes. The freer we can become. And the very same mindfulness practice can help us to see what are the activities in our lives that addict us more to this, and what are the activities of in our lives that free us from it. I think I'll elaborate on this by saying, how about social media? And what's it like to use social media? The psychologists wire people up with brain scanning equipment and then expose them to social media feeds. And every time we get a like on social media, there's this squirt in the nucleus accumbens, which is the reward center of the brain. And basically dopamine is released and we get this good feeling. Oh, they liked me, or we get another follower or the like. And I don't know what your experience is with social media, but I try not to spend too much time on it, but I rarely see posts on, let's say, Facebook. I'm an older guy, so Facebook might be the medium, where somebody says, woke up this morning, had the runs again. I'm afraid I'm going to get a bad performance evaluation at work, and my partner, who I've been dating for the last few months, is going to leave me. No, it's like, here I am at a fantastic place, doing fantastic things with fantastic people, and you weren't included. That's what we see, right? We see these curated visions of others' lives. And it's as though if we were countries, nation states, it's as though we were reading our own crime and poverty statistics and looking at other people's travel brochures. So it makes us feel, in aggregate, lousy about ourselves, or it gets these competitive juices running. So this is an example where you can use mindfulness practice. Which social media activities seem to leave me craving more, right? Craving a like, craving a response. And which ones leave me, and this is going to lead to another really important antidote, which ones leave me feeling connected to other people, feeling closer in my friendships, feeling more intertwined in one another's worlds. And we can begin to shift our lives so that we're not so much playing out the addiction and deepening the groove of the addiction, but we can begin to develop other more wholesome avenues for our energies that actually help to free us from this.
So you talked about how, you're looking to succeed and do more things, and recognizing where that drive comes from, that wanting more. What is your understanding of where does that come from? Is it just the ego that's driven by the ego, or is it that we were conditioned as children, the way we were raised and the parents? What is your take on why we are like that?
Well, I think all of the above, that your thoughts about it resonate very much with mine. So we've got this instinct, right, for social comparison and who am I and how do I compare to the other primates in my troop? So that's running. We've got cultural messages that are running, including the constant reinforcement of this stuff with social media, where we're seeing other people's curated lives, but also including, as you said, all the messages that we might have gotten as kids, because our parents, looking out for us, so hated their own feelings of not good enough or inadequacy that they very much wanted us to succeed in whatever realm mattered to them. For one, it's, I want you to be a beautiful little girl because beauty matters there. For another one, I want you to be successful at school because academic success matters. For another one, I want you to be pious and a good fill in the blank for the religious or cultural tradition, good Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, etc. For somebody else, it's I want to see that your body's in good shape, or that you're using it well, and that you're good at sport. Essentially, what's happening is parents are trying to protect us from the very painful feelings that they've experienced a million times in their own lives. And I don't care whether they're the Olympic gold medalist or, the person in a very unglamorous position in life. We all experience these. So we try to help our kids succeed in whatever dimensions seem important. And we deliver these kinds of messages that also have the possible toxic element of feeling like, well, their love is contingent, right? That they only really love me if I'm smart or beautiful or athletically skilled or religiously pure or whatever it might be. So that tends to feed into it. And sadly, we live in a society that has so not examined this addiction and propensity that we're caught up in, that we're like fish in water. We see commercials all day long that suggest, if only you'd buy this product or go on this vacation or wear this clothing or fix your hair in this way, then you would be special and people would like you and you get to feel good about it. So the messaging comes from so many places, some instinctual, some reinforced by culture, some reinforced by family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a big soup of the conditioning coming from all different ways. And do you ever feel that certain people are born, become in certain molds? If you look at numerology or astrology and things like that, how things are literally in our astrological chart, who we are as personality wise. You look at numerology and it tells you a lot about the person just looking at a life path number. Oh, you're the communicator, you're the healer, you're the builder, the structure. Do you ever feel that you have molds when you work with people, that there are certain people that are certain ways? So when you talk about that roller coaster ride, and some days you just feel everybody's so much better, why can't I be better? And you feel intimidated, you get an email. Is it just your incarnation, your numerology, your astrology, that you incarnated to have these experiences?
It's a very interesting question. I don't have a lot of expertise with astrology or numerology, but we certainly something which is similar to that is, we're born with genetic predispositions, right? I mean, there's some people who, they hear music as a little kid and immediately they can reproduce it and sing brilliantly. Somebody else can immediately dance. You just see this naturally, or somebody can think, or so many different intelligences or talents, right, that show up. And the cauldron of early upbringing does so much to shape our development and either bring out these skills or not, and either make us feel that our success is contingent on these things. Like for me, just as a simple example that's close at hand. I was pretty precocious verbally as a little kid. So I remember, one of my early experiences of feeling good about myself was my dad, who was an educator, smiling when I used some big word, some polysyllabic word, not as big as polysyllabic, but some big word as a little kid. And, and I could just see he was proud, and I kind of got it, that this was special and good, and, totally doubled down on that. And, I'm still milking it for what it's worth, just waiting for the first signs of dementia to take it away entirely. But yeah, I got hooked on that. And that started to work to compensate a bit for getting picked close to last on the kickball team in elementary school, because the athletic kids got it that the Siegel kid wasn't so coordinated. He dropped the ball in right field, and this kind of stuff, and feeling horrible about those experiences, feeling good about the other ones, and that becomes. I'm not saying this is the same as a numerological prediction or an astrological prediction, but we become molded. Right? We have these propensities, and then we interact with the environment, and then we get hooked on one or another thing as what we rely on to try to feel okay about ourselves. And it does feel, we certainly don't choose this consciously. So in that sense, it feels as though it was in the stars, right? I might think it was in our genes and our upbringing more than the stars, because I'm more a psychologist than an astrologer, but I think it's the same idea, that it's, this feels like the organism that we've got to work with now, and how are we going to work with this particular organism, me, as it's constellated, and see if I might find a way to, to live in more harmony and be less stressed out and have a little bit more joy and connection in my life.
I love what you're bringing up. When you're talking about that, you were this little kid, and then you said this big word, and you could see how proud your dad was. And that's, even if he didn't say anything, you could feel it as a child. You knew that he really appreciated that, and he thought of you as this smart kid who knew these big words. So then you're growing up. So the way you then received approval, and you were seen, you were heard, you felt the love in return when you used these big words. So then that drove you then to learn more big words and become smarter. Would you say that you were really conditioned to go the path of becoming who you are today, because that was, and you're still driven by it, because you're still doubting it, because you're still looking for the confirmation from other people, because you got to keep working at it, because now you wrote a book, now you have to write another one, because you got to keep getting that approval, just like a little kid who was looking for that smile.
Very much. I at one point in the process of writing this most recent book, I sent an email to my editor saying that I'm feeling pretty good about it because it's working. I'm actually feeling less trapped by social comparison, more clear about the utter folly of it, and more putting my energies into things. And I do want to get to the things that are more sustaining and aren't kind of subject to this roller coaster. And so, I think I'm going to send you back the advance, because who needs another book? I mean, the whole point of the story was breaking free, and it's working. And she wrote back saying, no, I think this could be useful to the world. And I said, I was kidding, but I was only half kidding, right? For exactly the reasons that you just laid out. So yes, that is how it works. But the really good news, and I want to pivot to this a little bit. The really good news is there are other things that are so much more sustaining that we can put our energy into. And if we can identify those and work with those, we can really live richer lives. And having shown that to you, like what? Well, I think the most important one is to shift toward making a connection, not an impression, in the world. So often when we're interacting with other people, we're concerned with what they think. How do I look? How did I sound? Do they like me? Don't they like me? Do they respect me? Do they not respect me? And we posture, we do things to try to get a positive outcome. The whole thing shifts when we really focus on making a connection. We know this when any of us who have been sufficiently blessed, and it's many of us, to have had a good friend that we could talk honestly with. When we're talking honestly with a good friend, this whole business of how am I doing, and am I a good person or a bad person, am I skilled or not, it really starts to soften. We start to feel in the honesty. In fact, the very sense of self shifts. It shifts from being a me with a you out there to becoming a we or an us. We just feel like, we're intertwined. We're not these separate organisms having to in any way prove ourselves or get evaluated. And that is such a profound relief. And we can actually do that in all our interactions. We can actually think, okay, how do I connect with this person here? How do I help this person feel understood and understand me in a way that's not about the stuff? And whenever we feel ourselves, kind of getting into the comparison game, my friend and colleague Terry Real, he's a well-known couples therapist. He says, when you feel the balloon floating up, like, hey, look at me, I'm doing well, just tug at it, pull it down a little bit. And when you feel the balloon sinking, like, oh, they're better than I am, I'm not so good, tug it up and realize that nobody is more valuable than another person. Nobody is fundamentally better than another human being. And you know what? I don't mean to be a downer, but we're all going to be dead, and not that long from now. And what does all of this matter in that context? Might it be more worthwhile to just try to shift toward being a little bit nicer to each other so that we can connect more deeply toward one another? So that is one absolutely useful avenue. And it actually draws on a whole other set of instincts, because we don't only have these kind of competitive or evaluative instincts. We've got strong instincts for connection and cooperation. We're a super social species, and we can build on that. But it helps to be aware of the other forces, really notice how we're caught in them, really notice how the society we live in is caught in them, so that we can pour our energies into a meaningful alternative.
And your book talks about many ways to free ourselves from the stress of trying to prove ourselves or avoid feeling not good enough. And you mentioned the 3H approach involving heads, our hearts, and our habits. Could you share some examples of that?
Yeah, great. This is such a powerful set of forces that to shift them, we kind of have to approach them on many levels. The head level begins by just noticing the thoughts, noticing these thoughts coming and going, and noticing how often some thought of I'm doing well or I'm not doing well, I'm good or I'm bad, shows up in the mind. We can also use our heads to think about, wait a minute, how's this whole game organized? For example, if I'm feeling good about myself, what's my grading period that I'm using? Is it everything I've done since I was born? Like, let's say I'm hooked on intelligence, because I get hooked on intelligence. Is it every time I did something that seemed intelligent since I was a little kid? Does the big word count, with my daddy? Or is it just like since adulthood? Or is it just like last week or the last hour? Because when we start to use our heads to examine this, we notice, wait, this is a crazy system. For a lot of us, it's just the last hour that's determining this. And like, what happened? What happened to the whole cumulative GPA since we were born? So we start to see the system is nutty. So we can use our heads to both monitor this, notice what's going on, and examine how flawed this whole system is. Our hearts become really important because this really connects back to what you were asking before about all the different childhood events. Every time we have one of these experiences of being picked nearly last for the kickball team, and obviously many people who have suffered far more painful ones. People who live in marginalized groups have suffered macro and micro aggressions often throughout their whole lives. Super painful in terms of how you feel about yourself. people who've grown up in families where parents were like not just ordinarily concerned with their self-esteem, but were actually narcissistic and needed to put the kid down or have the kid always look up to them. Super painful kind of wounds. Rejections, when, I mean, I can tell you, I'm a heterosexual guy. I have vivid memories of every love relationship that didn't work out. Were they particularly worse than others? No, but boy, are they in there. And boy, did I have feelings of not being lovable, not being good enough when those relationships broke up. So we all have basically trauma histories around this. One of the ways we can work with our hearts is every time a new disappointment comes up, every time we feel like we failed, we feel rejected, we feel not sufficiently recognized or not sufficiently respected, to take a moment and feel inside and notice, what does this remind me of? What's happening here? To give you a personal example, I was at a conference and I was a speaker, and there are these big kind of cocktail hours that are organized for the speakers. And I was there, and a lot of people were very well known in my field, and I just started getting the feeling that the people who were super well known in my field were kind of gravitating toward one another, and I was kind of on the B team. And I noticed the feeling, and I took a moment to say, all right, so what's this? And immediately there I was in elementary school, my older brother having kind of just been on the cusp of adolescence, and his friends were still tolerating me tagging along, but I was clearly in a different category, and it hurt. And the pain of that, of feeling like the little runt, back there, and they weren't worse than other older brothers were, but but it was what it was. The pain of that was exactly what this was resonating with, and was exactly what was making it so that here's this real difficult feeling in the heart. But it was because the past injury was being triggered, if you will, by the current one. And by connecting with that, it shifted the whole thing, because it was like, oh yeah, I'm not a little kid, and it's okay if they're more famous than I am, and let me join in the conversation anyway. And we actually had a very nice connected evening together. But it required working with the heart. And the habits part is really looking at, what are the things I do that further my addiction to this, that further my addiction to looking for feeling good about myself, getting that wonderful feeling of, hey, I'm special, and avoiding the, messed up again. What are the things that keep that going, and what are the things that relax it? For example, like in social media, if I'm hunting for likes, I may decide, I want to change that habit, or I'm even going to go on a diet and limit it, and only use social media to actually connect to people I care about, rather than to kind of browse around and see what everybody's up to. Or I start to notice that, I'm going shopping to buy stuff, partly to show other people that I'm cool, or I have a good sense of style, or even that I'm rich enough to buy stuff. Maybe I'm going to try going on a diet there. Maybe I'm going to try not doing that, and instead call a friend and have a meaningful conversation with a friend, or reach out to somebody that I haven't reached out to in a while, or simply do an act of kindness or generosity for another person as a way to connect and notice what it feels like. So actually changing what we do in the world. So I think to inch toward freedom, and I do say inch because I've been at it for some time. I wrote the book and I'm still working at it. But to inch toward freedom, I think we have to approach it on all these different fronts, and use our minds and our thinking, connect with what's happening in our heart, and work affirmatively to change our habits.
Oh, that's such good advice. I feel that I think most people struggle with addictions of some sort, and it's either getting the likes, like you said, on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, or shopping, eating, showing they have a good time, taking pictures of their food, Facebook, and then everybody else feels like, wow, they're always out having a good time. Here I am at home, right? And that whole roller coaster. So I think it's your book sounds absolutely amazing, and I think so many people will benefit from reading your book. So how do they find your book? So again, it's called The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are.
So if you were to Google that, you'd find it on Amazon and all the other booksellers. It's a regularly published book. You could also go to my website, which is drronsiegel.com. And I don't know if you publish little
Yes,
notes.
I will put that on in the
But if
notes.
you could put that on, that's easy, because there's links to the publisher and other booksellers, and there's links to different talks about these topics, and a whole lot of resources for developing a mindfulness practice if you want to work at that and integrate that into your life, as well as all sorts of other well-being related resources. So I think drronsiegel.com is the easiest avenue.
That's great. And does it come in paperback?
Yeah, it's
ebook,
a paperback. Yeah, no, it's a
audiobook?
paperback. It's an ebook. I'm not sure if the audiobook is yet published or is about to be published.
I saw it. I saw it on Amazon. So
it may
it's
be
either
published.
out
Okay.
or it's coming.
Okay, well, you may be ahead of me in terms of monitoring this. I try not to look at Amazon too often, because the secret is authors are always looking at their book rankings. And I made a vow when this book came out to not do it, and I've managed to not do it since the book came out. I'm very proud of myself for that.
Right, that is quite the feat. It always makes me think of Brene Brown. She did a Netflix special where she shared her own journey to become famous, and how she used to drive around with the books in her trunk. And she had done some big interview or some big event, and her husband left for work and said, whatever you do, don't look at the comments. And of course, as soon as he left, she looked at all the comments and then ate a whole, pint of ice cream as a result, or peanut butter or something. But it's very true. Because it's, some people will love you and some people won't like you. And that's just the nature of life itself. And some people will love the work that you do, and some people will say, I don't resonate with it.
Right.
And
I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, and our brains have a very strong negativity bias. This is another thing that they evolved. It's very relevant to this. Because if you could imagine being out there in the African savannah, you could make one of two types of errors. We call them a type 1 error and type 2 error in science. And type 1 error would be looking at a beige shape behind some bushes and going, oh my God, it's a lion, when it was really just a beige rock. And a type 2 error would be saying, it's a beige rock, when it's really a lion. And you could make countless type 1 errors and still survive. One type 2 error, that's the end of your DNA line. So our minds are always remembering the bad stuff. Our ancestors were running around the savannah going, oh my God, could be a lion, not another one of those poisonous snakes. Uh-oh, a cliff. Remember that plant with the thorns last time? And the way this plays out with this self-esteem stuff is Brene Brown or me or you could be reading through a list of, a dozen people saying, that was great, I really enjoyed that. Or I learned something from that, or that's helpful in my life. And one person said, this is silly, or, oh, I've heard this all before, something like that. And which one are we going to remember at 4 a.m, right? It's like clockwork that the bad things stick. My friend Rick Hansen, who's written a lot about the negativity bias, he came up with a metaphor. He says, the brain is like Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good ones. The Teflons slide right off the pan. The bad ones, they stick. So that's, so the reading the comment, it's one of the reasons why it's so easy to get caught in this stuff.
Oh, such good advice. Everybody go and check out his book, The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary, Finding Happiness Right Where You Are, by Dr. Ronald D. Siegel. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time and being a guest on the podcast today. It's just wonderful to have you share all your knowledge.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and comments, and thank you for having me.
Well, you're so welcome.